spent the last 4 years serving the 5th District constituents, the citizens of this 5th District, and it was one of the greatest honors and joys of my life. You know, when representatives, they come and go, but the constituents, they stay. And the kind of service that the representatives are there to serve them, and it's been my joy to do that. But when let me just go back a little bit. Back in 1992, my husband and I, our 5 children, and then I had one that wasn't yet baked yet, and we got on a plane and we headed to the country of Ukraine. And I had been out to Canada, I had been in Mexico, but I had never been for a long period of time to another country. And so we got there and landed into a country, and culture shock is the biggest understatement ever. A government-controlled country is where we went, and we spent 8 years there. I learned very quickly that I could not buy sugar, I could not buy flour, I could not buy oil, we could not buy fuel for our vehicles because we did not have a ration card. And I watched the bread lines. We had to go to the border of Poland to get all the other things we needed. And we learned very quickly that we were followed, we were watched, and they ratted on us. We were robbed several times. One point, my husband was beat almost to death. So there was a lot of very interesting things and that a government-controlled country gave me when we went there. I have to say it was 8 rewarding years because we shared the gospel with people, and I have a lot of friends there now, which is sad to me because many of them have passed away or been killed in this war. But, long story short, I learned what it was like to be controlled. Every move we made, was controlled by the government. We had to register every one of our children and us if we wanted to get a ration card. We decided not to do that because they already had our information through our visa process, but we learned a lot about what it's like to be controlled by the government. When we came home in 2000, we learned very quickly that our education had changed. We put our kids in school, and we heard a lot about socialism and people praising it as if it was something good. And I was thinking, wow, I've never been involved in politics, but I think I better learn about what we need to do to make sure we have good leaders and good people elected to keep our constitutional values and our founding principles. And so my husband and I got involved, and for the past 24 years have tried to elect good people who hold to our Constitution and are willing to stand up for it. Long story short, when I got into this office 4 years ago in 2021, I never realized, and for the first time in my life, I realized we are headed in the wrong direction. Because the very first week I was there, we had a call from a constituent who said, I received a letter from the Department of Labor, and I don't know what they're talking about, but they're telling me I have to pay $48,000, and I have 30 days to pay it. And they said, I didn't make this mistake. In their letter, it states that they made the mistake. There was no way I could possibly have known. And in this book, I have that letter, so you can read it for yourself. And they said, why do I have to pay for a mistake that the agency made? Well, long story short, we got, over the past 4 years, 7,000. We have resolved or tried to resolve 7,000 cases. And I don't know if very many of you own businesses here. How many own businesses or run a farm or do something like that? Okay, or have had in the past. We have all had to do that before. Very quickly, I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but very quickly, I want to just share that when I started getting these calls, I was so shocked. I felt like I was back in Ukraine going through culture shock. I was like, how do these agencies have permission to make these rules, then they enforce those rules, and then they're adjudicating the rules. They're the judge and the executioner. And so I began to ask questions, and I asked questions of the heads of the agencies we were dealing with, and everybody just said, this is the way it is. Well, I went to Washington, D.C. for some training. There were several hundred district directors from all over the country. And I thought, I've got to do some research. I've got to find out, is this normal? Or am I the only American who thinks we're supposed to be free from this kind of tyranny? And so I started talking from East Coast, West Coast, north, south, it didn't matter. And a lot of them said, yes, it makes us feel really terrible because we get the same calls you're getting. And I said, well, what are your members, your representatives saying about this? What are the senators saying about it? And they said, well, they just said, this is the way government works. This is just the bureaucracy, and there's really nothing we can do about it. Well, I didn't know anything about Doge at the time. I had no clue that Trump was going to come out with Doge, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I got so mad that I decided I was going to do some research and find out how they constitutionally have the power to do this to Americans. And my research, I did about 9 months of research. I got about 309 pages. It's not all in this book. You do have access to it for free at my website, governmentservantormaster.com. But I learned that it is incredible. And as we have been hearing about Doge bringing out, we've got to cut the government, the size and the scope of government. I can't even begin to tell you. One of the agencies I found was one that was spending millions of your taxpayer dollars on a squirrel that was found that had 3 eyes in some national forest somewhere. And they were spending chips and cameras and all throughout just to see, why did it have 3 eyes? Well, it probably got a little too close to some radiation while it was in its mother's womb. But it was just a lot of agencies that, one agency has 21 members, 9 congressional members, 9 senators, and a few from the executive branch. They spend millions and probably billions of dollars in other countries. What are they doing? And when I tried to find out what are these countries, what are they doing spending this money in these other countries, it was just crazy. So I began to learn a lot of things about our government that, yeah, there's a reason we're $36 trillion in debt. But the other thing that really bothered me so much is when people called us in desperation, your fellow neighbors and citizens would call us and we would do our best to help them. Thank God we fought. The Social Security Administration, as you guys probably well know, we got in during COVID. All of them, 100% of them across the country were shut down. And we had people who were being told they were dead by the IRS, by the Social Security Administration, that they could not even do business because you're dead. And the lady said, well, I'm standing here and I'm not dead. That was one of our cases. She's now alive, and she said she will let us we would probably be the first to know if she was considered deceased again. But, then people who just couldn't take their baby across into Canada to visit their mother when she was dying because the baby had not been given a Social Security number and the baby was 6 months old, but the Social Security offices were down. It's just silliness, just clumping up our lives and making our lives miserable. But anyway, we were able to get somebody fired because nobody was responding to our emails. Nobody was responding to our phone calls. Anyway, that led me to write this book, and that's what I'm here to talk about tonight. And I know I have 11 minutes left, but I want to go through very quickly and just share with you what I share. As I researched, I began to realize that we can't defend our republic if we don't know where we came from. And what our founding fathers gave us in the Constitution to protect us from this kind of tyranny. So my first chapter actually just shares a little bit about what it was like to live in a government-controlled country and coming home and finding out, wow, we're headed that direction. My husband actually grew up in East Africa. When the Chinese and the Russians came in, one of the first things they did was take everybody's guns. And I will share this too, very quickly. AOC, when the very first week I was in office, of course that was January 6th, how can any of us forget that? I was at the Capitol on January 6th because I was picking up supplies. It was my first week to work. And that week, I didn't go in the building. I did get tear gas because I was back, but the wind was blowing, and so I got some of that tear gas because we heard all this commotion going on next door. But the very first week, the New York Times and the Washington Post was trying to get me fired. I'm a brand new person because they were calling me an insurrectionist. It's just par for the course. And honestly, that part of this world I didn't like. I don't like ugly politics. To me, we're all Americans. We need to love each other. We need to support each other. We need to encourage one another. I know that we have races, and I understand all that. But it's about America. It's about saving our country. My first chapter talks about government servant or master, a little bit about living in a government-controlled country. The second chapter talks about the Founding Fathers' design. I learned in my research that our kids are not learning about where they came from. They don't know anything about the Declaration of Independence, about the 27 grievances of why our Founding Fathers fled Europe. Why? You go look and read. I talk about that in here and share it in plain English, and even the stories about why they wrote those 27 grievances. Some of those grievances are happening today in this country, and we need to wake up and start fighting for our country like our Founding Fathers did. I talk about the Constitution and how beautiful it is. I talk about the 27 amendments. I talk about how we got from 1776, when we declared our independence, to where we are today. Very short version of it, but so you can understand what actually has happened over the years. I talk about the behemoth, which is the administrative state, which Elon Musk and President Trump are trying to really take a whack at. I believe they're going to do a lot of it. They need to do it constitutionally, and we need to pray that our congressmen and women that are there are willing to have a strong backbone to stand up for what's constitutional and vote for what's constitutional, or we will lose this nation. And again, it's little bite sizes because it was so much information. I tried to share every single agency that I could possibly find. And then I share real stories of abuse from your district, of people. I changed their names. I got permission from the General House Counsel. I had to get permission to write a book. I had to get permission from the House Ethics Committee, and I did have to get permission from the member that I was serving, and I agreed with that because they were his constituents. I share those stories here in that chapter 5. Chapter 6, I talk about what each of us can do. Not all of us want to run for politics. You guys are the choir today. I'm speaking to the choir, people who are concerned, who are here tonight and are involved. But I speak about what you can do down, to the youngest person who's 18 and even younger, to the oldest person who thinks they don't have anything to contribute. I talk about what Congress can do, what they must do, and then I talk about, is there hope? And there is hope. And I want to share with you, I had finished the book and I was writing one of the latter chapters, and I heard on the news, I started hearing about the Chevron Doctrine being overturned by the Supreme Court. How many of you know what the Chevron Doctrine is? Good. I'm going to share with you a little bit. Up until now, back on June 11, 1946, our Congress gave permission to all of these agencies to have all three powers that our Founding Fathers said had to be separate. They gave them power to legislate, to make rules. That's legislation, that's law. They gave them power to execute or enforce those laws, and then they gave the power to judge the people who broke them. That's not constitutional. And that was an act of the Administrative Procedures Act that was put back in 1946. Well, back in 1984, there was a case that came up, and the courts were told they had to defer to the agency's ruling. That's not constitutional either. The Supreme Court, back in June this past year, overturned that and said the courts have the right to judge. For example, this man that was told he had 30 days to pay $48,000, he didn't get a hearing. He is now paying $800 a month, getting that taken from his Social Security. Every month. It started out as $400 to $500. And they've added penalties and interest. And we have begged them, and I finally talked to the lady highest up. And I said to her, if I go out and murder somebody today, are you going to pay the price for my mistake or my, wrongdoing, my crime? Well, no, it's not the same. I said, yes, it is. He didn't do anything wrong. Your agency did something wrong. You need to eat the cost. But, this is what we did for the past 4 years. I have fought for people who were being abused by the system. So I am grateful to Donald Trump that he is in, and I'm praying that DOJ is a success, but we have to make sure that Congress does their part, that we do our part, and that we understand what we're fighting for. So the final thought, when the Chevron Doctrine was overturned, now the courts do not have to defer to the agencies. So I'm grateful for that. I don't know if you wanted them to ask any questions. I could probably stop now and see if there's any questions they have.
Sure, we want to do.
I have 4 minutes and 55 seconds. If you have any questions. And the one thing I did want to mention, there's something called FinCEN for all of you who have your own businesses. And my husband just received a letter just not a couple weeks, I think 3 weeks ago. The Department of the Treasury is forcing all the banks around the country to send letters telling you that you have to report and you have to register with FinCEN, which is a financial crimes unit. And one of my friends who is an FBI agent and actually works with FinCEN, she says, Sandy, you need to have the congressman oppose this because this is a criminal suspect list. And we had farmers from Farmville and all over calling us and saying, why? I'm retired, but they're requiring me, everything I own I have to say, who's the beneficiaries and all this stuff. This is ridiculousness. This is an absolute overreach of government. And I talk about that in this book because it happened right when I was finishing the book. But it is, as of January 1, 2025, if you don't register, you can be charged $5,000 a day or time in prison. And it's absolutely out of control. That's why I'm very thrilled about DOGE and that Trump's in because it has to be done. I do know executive orders are not lasting. We have to have Congress. We have the majority in House, the Senate, and the White House. And we have to make sure that our people are really doing something with the majority that we have, even as slim as it is. Because this country is, we've got a lot to turn back. So I've got 31 seconds. Anybody have another question?
Sure.
I'm seeing my timer there.
I just have a comment. One of the problems, we have all three, the problem is the filibuster, so you have to have 7 more votes.
Right, I know.
And so it makes it difficult. So a lot of people that don't understand that think that, that we're slacking or the Senate is slacking and we're not.
Right. Yeah, I know. And it's a very difficult situation we find ourselves in, but by God's help, they'll do something good. And some of the Democrats, they don't want this either. There are a few of them that don't want that kind of control. But anyway, my time is up. Thank you so much. And I do have books for sale if you are interested in reading the book, and I'll be here to sign out.